Scott Eastwood's journey into Hollywood was never as simple as people assume. From the outside, it looks like a straight path paved by one of the most legendary last names in film history. But the reality was far messier, quieter, and far more isolating. Scott auditioned relentlessly, often for his own father's movies, and was rejected more times than he could count. He watched roles come and go while his father, Clint Eastwood, continued to dominate Hollywood. There were no shortcuts, no special favors, and no safety net. For years, Scott lived in the uncomfortable space between opportunity and rejection, where effort didn't always equal progress, and persistence didn't guarantee results. A birth that stayed out of the spotlight. Scott Eastwood was born on March 21, 1986, in Monterey, California, far from the flash of Hollywood cameras. At the time, Clint Eastwood was already an established star and director, but Scott's arrival wasn't publicly acknowledged. His mother, Jocelyn Reeves, was a flight attendant who had met Clint during his travels in the mid-1980s. Their relationship was private, and Scott entered the world without the Eastwood name on his birth certificate. He was known as Scott Clinton Reeves, and for many years that quiet distinction shaped how he moved through life, largely unseen by the industry his father ruled. A childhood away from Hollywood privilege. Scott's early life didn't resemble that of a typical celebrity child. He wasn't raised on movie sets or surrounded by luxury. Instead, he grew up in relatively modest circumstances, first in California and later in Hawaii, after his mother decided to put physical distance between their family and Hollywood attention. In Hawaii, Scott lived a life that felt normal. His classmates didn't know who his father was, and he didn't volunteer the information. Clint Eastwood wasn't a constant presence in his daily life, and Scott learned early on how to rely on himself and his mother rather than fame or family reputation. Learning independence the hard way. As Scott grew older, he worked construction jobs, waited tables, and took on whatever work he could find. There were no trust funds waiting for him, no automatic support. When he enrolled at Loyola Marymount University, he paid his own way and studied communications while taking acting classes on the side. He continued using the name Scott Reeves because he wanted to succeed or fail on his own terms. Auditions came, but so did rejection, often in overwhelming amounts. Even with talent and dedication, doors didn't magically open, and the emotional toll of constant dismissal began to build. Auditioning without favors. One of the most painful realities Scott faced was auditioning for nearly every film his father directed and being turned down repeatedly. Clint Eastwood held firm to a philosophy of self-reliance. He believed success meant earning your place, not inheriting it. While that principle earned Clint respect, it left Scott feeling overlooked and frustrated. When Clint directed major films like American Sniper, Scott hoped for a chance, even a small one, but it never came. The lesson was clear. If Scott wanted to succeed, it would have to be without leaning on his father's power. Small roles and invisible progress. Scott's early acting work was quiet and largely unnoticed. He appeared briefly in Flags of Our Fathers under the name Scott Reeves, deliberately keeping his identity hidden. Other roles followed in low-budget films that never reached wide audiences. Some projects went straight to video. Others barely screened at all. Despite the effort he put in, progress felt painfully slow. He was working hard without recognition, stuck in a professional gray area where he wasn't unknown but wasn't established either. A complicated family dynamic. Clint Eastwood has a large and complex family, with children born across different decades and relationships. Scott grew up knowing he was one part of a much bigger story, one that didn't always feel connected. Some siblings were raised with wealth and visibility, others weren't. Family gatherings were infrequent and sometimes awkward. Scott often felt like he belonged everywhere and nowhere at the same time. That sense of distance contributed to emotional struggles during his teenage years, including anger and confusion he didn't always know how to express. Stepping into his own name. By the time Scott reached his mid-20s, he stopped hiding from his identity. In 2009, he appeared in Invictus, directed by Clint Eastwood, using the Eastwood name publicly for the first time. The decision felt risky, but it also felt honest. The film's themes of resilience and proving yourself mirrored Scott's own journey. He wasn't asking for special treatment, only recognition for the work he was doing. Slowly, people began to notice, taking risks outside his comfort zone. In 2011, Scott took a bold leap by signing on to Texas Chainsaw 3D. Horror wasn't his comfort zone, and the franchise carried heavy expectations, but he needed momentum. The role forced him into a spotlight that couldn't be ignored. While the film received mixed reactions, it introduced Scott to a wider audience and showed that he was willing to take chances rather than wait for perfect opportunities. Breakthrough with Fury. Everything shifted in 2014 with Fury. Cast alongside Brad Pitt, Shia LaBeouf, and Jon Bernthal, Scott underwent intense military training and performed demanding physical work. The experience pushed him to his limits, but the payoff was enormous. The cast earned a Best Ensemble award, and for the first time, Scott was being discussed as a serious actor rather than a famous son. The performance gave him credibility he couldn't borrow or fake. Expanding his range. Scott surprised audiences again in The Longest Ride, a romantic drama that showcased a completely different side of him. He performed physically demanding scenes and leaned into emotional vulnerability. The role earned him breakout recognition and proved he wasn't limited to action or war films. That same year, his appearance in Taylor Swift's Wildest Dreams music video expanded his visibility even further, introducing him to an entirely new audience and demonstrating his comfort crossing genres. Private loss and quiet grief. Behind the scenes, Scott was dealing with deep personal loss. In 2014, his longtime partner, Jewel Brangman, passed away in a tragic car accident. Scott kept his grief private for years, choosing not to speak publicly about it until much later. The loss profoundly affected him, reshaping how he viewed relationships, vulnerability, and emotional expression. Grief didn't disappear with time, but it changed him, deepening his perspective both as a person and as an actor. Finding balance through discipline. One unexpected source of stability in Scott's life came from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, a practice introduced to him by close friend Paul Walker. The discipline offered something Hollywood couldn't: humility, structure, and emotional release. On the mat, reputation didn't matter, effort did. The practice became a grounding force, especially during times of grief and uncertainty, teaching Scott resilience without ego and strength without performance. Entering a global franchise. In 2017, Scott joined the Fast and the Furious franchise as Little Nobody, stepping into a role designed to carry forward the spirit of Paul Walker's legacy without imitating it. The franchise gave Scott instant global exposure and confirmed he could hold his own in massive productions. He balanced charm and authority, earning respect from both audiences and cast members. Testing himself in blockbusters. Scott continued challenging himself with films like Pacific Rim Uprising, navigating large-scale action, motion capture, and demanding physical performances. While critical response was mixed, the experience tested his ability to carry major studio projects. It wasn't about perfection, it was about endurance and growth. Proving emotional depth. In The Outpost, Scott delivered one of his most grounded performances, portraying the reality of modern warfare with restraint and authenticity. The film received critical praise, particularly from veterans who recognized its honesty. It marked a turning point, proving Scott could handle emotionally complex material without relying on spectacle. Building beyond acting. Outside of film, Scott co-founded Made Here, a brand focused on American-made clothing and manufacturing pride. The project reflected his values around hard work, craftsmanship, and respect for labor. Rather than chasing trends, the brand focused on essentials and storytelling, emphasizing the people behind the products. Choosing instinct over pressure. At one point, Scott turned down a lucrative multi-film studio deal because it didn't feel right. After discussing it with his father, he chose instinct over obligation. The decision highlighted his growth and confidence, showing he no longer felt pressured to say yes, simply to stay relevant. A relationship that evolved with time. Scott's relationship with Clint Eastwood evolved as he matured. What once felt distant gradually became more grounded and respectful. Clint's influence showed up less through favors and more through lessons about discipline, accountability, and instinct. Today, Scott values the time he spends listening to his father's stories, aware that he's learning from one of the last living icons of classic Hollywood. Looking toward the future. With upcoming films spanning romance, drama, and action, Scott Eastwood continues carving a career defined by persistence rather than privilege. He's no longer chasing validation or running from his name. He's standing in it, shaped by rejection, discipline, grief, and growth. His story isn't about inheriting a legacy. It's about earning one, slowly, imperfectly, and honestly.